Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to our discussion about the 30 Years' War, right? So we just started talking about in class the crisis of the 1600s, right? Or AKA 17th century crisis, right? So from now on, I'm going to start dropping, of course, a couple of little like John Green videos and stuff like that down in the descriptions below if y'all want to take a gander at them or go ahead and give them a look, right? Now, the big thing I will say about the videos that I may actually drop down in there and stuff like that is they do go into even more depth than I do in a lot of stuff. So remember, it's much more about the big concepts and stuff like that we're looking at, the thematic things, and I also choose other little things to go a little bit deeper on than John Green or Tom Ritchie or anybody else does, right? But the big thing, though, is we do have to continue our discussion about the crisis of the 17th century, aka the crisis of the 1600s, which included not only the Little Ice Age, which is going to cause a massive amount of crop failures, massive rains, and a drop in about 0.5 degrees Celsius of the entire continent, which is going to lead to starvation, famines, and a lot of other spread of diseases and things like that. You're also going to see the growth of war, right? War and massive religious violence that was breaking out all over the continent of Europe, from the 80 Years' War to the French Wars of religion, ending finally in the 1590s. And then also, of course, going up into the 30 Years' War, which will characterize the entirety of the biggest war period throughout most of Europe. And it will be the bloodiest and most intense and most destructive war that Europe has ever seen up until this point, right? So it's going to lead to the most loss of life. It's going to lead to a lot of other issues while that Little Ice Age is going on. And then on top of everything else going on in the background, you've got massive inflation. Runaway inflation, as some historians have actually referred to it as. And some have referred to it as a price revolution, which I feel like is a little bit of a loaded term. But we talked about it a little bit today is with inflation. We tried to explain it a little bit, where all of these countries are seeing massive influxes of gold and silver from North America, and the prices went up after the influxes of those things, and then a war is going to start, and it's going to take a lot of money to fight said wars. The prices are going to stay high, but people have less money to work with now. Inflation is going to kill, right? There's also this thing called devaluing of currency, like Mackenzie Clark and I were talking about today, but you don't need to worry about that too much, okay? So we're getting into it, though, now with the 30 Years' War, right? So the 30 Years' War is going to be such a big deal, such a just a very intense thing that is going to drastically affect the progression of politics and the progression of, honestly, everything going forward throughout the entirety of this unit, and then also going forward as well. Now, what I will say as well, though, is 30 Years' War, lasting from 1618 to 1648, is another one of those hang-your-hat-on-it kind of dates. Like when Rowan today was like, wait a minute, 1508 to 1512, Sistine Chapel ceiling. 1517, Reformation. Yeah, you need to know dates like that, right? So about 100 years after, a little over 101 years after Martin Luther began his Reformation, this massive war would be started, okay? 1618 to 1648, we are going to talk about things for the next two units that happened before, during, and after this big war. So just remember in your mind, on that timeline, that's where that bad boy is going to go, right? So looking at this really quick, though, getting into the war and stuff, before the war ever broke out, while the Little Ice Age is going on, while inflation is running like crazy through the rest of Europe, the big thing about it is that people were beginning to realize that the Peace of Augsburg was only a temporary solution to the religious violence that was going on. The Peace of Augsburg, remember, brought an end to the Schmalkaldic Wars. It brought an end to Charles V's rule as Holy Roman Emperor, because he is going to abdicate immediately after the Peace of Augsburg, split the family in half, and move on to greener pastures. And by greener pastures, I mean to that French monastery where he eventually goes insane and dies. So, big thing, though, also, is that it was only a temporary solution, because what it set up was basically it recognized Lutheranism, not Calvinism, as a legitimate religion throughout the Holy Roman Empire. But that's not even the biggest issue. Yes, it said that princes can now be Lutheran. Yes, it said that princes can now be Catholic. But the issue is that the Peace of Augsburg had an addendum in it, a piece of little text that said, Caius regio eius religio, which is Latin for whom this land belongs, their religion shall be, right? Basically what that means, and I'm sure I just butchered that translation. Please don't call me out in front of Miss Urso. I'm sure she knows it a heck of a lot better than I do, but I'm sure y'all know it even better than I do. But the big thing about it, what it's referring to, is the religion of your lord or king is your religion. So basically, what's happening is if you had a Lutheran prince, your people are now Lutheran. If you had a Catholic prince, your people are now Catholic. And before all this stuff really got kicked up, there was this Holy Roman Emperor named Matthias, right? Matthias is actually kind of an Italian/Germanic way of saying Matthew. And Matthias number, Matthias or Matthias number the first, is going to be very casual about, like, freedom of religion. He's going to allow a lot of Protestants to practice. He's going to allow a lot of Catholics to practice. But he was eventually replaced by one of his family members in the Habsburg monarchy. He's going to be replaced by this guy named Ferdinand II. And Ferdinand II comes along and starts really ramming home the idea that if you are Catholic, you better have a Catholic prince. And that if your prince is Lutheran, then they are going to be, your people are going to be Lutheran. But also Ferdinand II absolutely did not like the Protestants in the first place. He wanted a lot of these different lands to go back to Catholic leaders and to go back to Catholic holdings and to go back to Catholic monasteries. So he comes along and really starts stirring the pot. He starts trying to put in Catholic princes and put in Catholic leaders and lords. And what's going to happen is in the 1610s, when Ferdinand II comes to power in the Holy Roman Empire, there's going to be the formation of these new groups, right? In the early 1600s, before the war ever broke out, there was this thing formed called the Protestant Union, where all the German princes who were Protestant got together and formed basically Schmalkaldic League 2.0, right? And they just called it the Protestant Union. And then the Catholic League is going to be formed of other Germanic Holy Roman Empire princes that wanted to stay Catholic and wanted to support a return to Catholicism and a return of lands to Catholic people, right? And so as we see, we've got two enemies that have been created inside of the Holy Roman Empire. Now remember, the Holy Roman Empire is a massive area of land that includes modern-day countries at the time, like Switzerland, Bohemia, which is very important that you know where Bohemia is. That's the modern-day Czech Republic, right? It also included places like parts of Poland. It also included areas of Austria, Liechtenstein, northern Italy, all this other stuff. So as you can see, this whole dissemination of different religions is going to cause a lot of confusion and a lot of intensity and eventually lead to a heck of a lot of violence. Well, Ferdinand II starts sending his representatives out to claim new lands and to get more Catholic territory back and stuff like that. And what's going to end up happening is it's going to lead to the outbreak of the 30 Years' War. Now, one of the biggest events that happens is, write this down, okay? It's a very important event that you need to make sure you have. It's the Second Defenestration of Prague. And some of you are like, what the front door did he just say? I'm going to spell it for you real quick, okay? The Second Defenestration of Prague. Second, as in the second one, which means there was a first one, which that's a whole other conversation. That one happened in the 1400s. But the second defenestration, I'm literally looking at it right now so I spell it right, is D-E-F-E-N-E-S-T-R-A-T-I-O-N. Of Prague. And just to give you a heads up, Prague is the capital of the Czech Republic and stuff like that, and it was inside of Bohemia at the time, in the Eastern Holy Roman Empire. Ferdinand II had sent several representatives to Prague to enforce Catholic laws, to install a Catholic leader, and to tell all these Protestants in Bohemia to go back to being Catholic. And the Protestants were like, oh, nah, to heck with that. We ain't doing that. And they got so mad at the representatives of Ferdinand II that they decided to throw them out a window. The Second Defenestration of Prague is considered to be one of the most important events in this era of European history. When two guys got thrown out of a window and almost died, that's right, they actually didn't die, it is going to officially begin the 30 Years' War. And this war has 4 phases in it, right? Because once these representatives got hucked out a window and fell 21 meters to the ground, right, which is crazy, that's over 60 feet, right? Like, so 21 meters all the way to the ground, where some of you are like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, pump the brakes. 60 feet is like 6 stories. How did these dudes not die? Well, apparently they fell into a giant pile of horse crap, right? And all the Catholics were like, oh, angels swooped down and saved them from death. And all the Protestants were like, no, they fell in poop. All right, so like, now look, the big thing about it though is those guys lived, and this is going to bring the Protestant Union and the Catholic League crashing down on top of each other. And the very first phase of the 30 Years' War was known as the Bohemian Phase. It's when the Protestant Union and the Catholic League start fighting against one another. Now, there's a lot of other crazy stuff that happened. There was this guy named like Frederick V. Frederick V. That was the guy that was elected the king of the Palatinate and all this other stuff. But the one big event that happens in the Bohemian Phase is that at the Battle of White Mountain, right, the Battle of the White Mountain, the Protestant forces would be swiftly defeated by the Catholic forces. So something that's important to understand in this 30 Years' War up front. It is a localized religious war at first, right? In the Bohemian Phase, it's mostly taking place in Bohemia in this area called the Palatinate, which is actually in the Eastern Holy Roman Empire. And it's the forces of Ferdinand II, the Holy Roman Emperor, against the forces of the the Protestant princes, right? So the thing is the Catholics were better funded, They had better tactics, and they had better movements with their armies and artilleries, and they were able to swiftly defeat the Catholic forces at the Battle of White Mountain, right? Now, right after that, though, about 5 years later, there was this Danish king, right? His name was Christian V or VI or something like that. I can't remember. But, like, so the big thing about it, though, is this Danish king, the king of Denmark at the time. We're going to look that up really, really quickly, actually, just to double check. Danish king 30 Years War. All right, so now the Danish king, Denmark, 30 Years War, right? So here we go. Is going to be being led by, I was 100% right. Come on, tell me I was right. I was so close. It was Christian IV. All right, so but like the Danish king is going to start freaking out. And Denmark is a little bit north of the Holy Roman Empire, right? In this area that they control, because at the time they controlled both Denmark and Norway. And he starts freaking out. And he was like, dude, the Battle of White Mountain, the Protestants got destroyed. The Bohemians, I'm so afraid for them. We all saw what happened last time with the German Peasants' Revolt. And so Christian IV decides to send another Protestant military into the Holy Roman Empire to start this war back up again. So as you can tell, there was a little bit of a break for about 5 years. And the Denmark phase, or the Danish phase of this is when that Protestant king of Denmark goes to fight against Catholics, right? And so what ends up happening, though, is his forces are defeated. And why does he do this? Because he was afraid that Protestants were going to be persecuted under Catholic leaders like Ferdinand II. But he loses a huge amount of these battles, and a lot of those lands go back to Catholic leaders anyway. It's in this thing called the Edict of Restitution that Ferdinand forces a bunch of the Protestant princes to sign that give money, land, and monasterial land back to the Catholics and stuff like that, and reinstalls a bunch more even other Catholic nobles. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the Protestant militaries are just not big enough, not bad enough, not hardcore enough to stop the Catholic forces. Because the Catholic forces have guns, and these people called pikemen, which I'll actually demonstrate to you during class and stuff like that tomorrow. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But then something insane happens, and rising up out of the ashes, like a phoenix from the flames, begins the Swedish phase of the 30 Years' War. When this dude right here, by the name of Gustavus Adolphus, or Gustavus I, Gustavus, the king of Sweden, who had a massive army, decides, oh, heck no. I'm going to cross that little body of water known as the Baltic Sea. I'm coming into the Holy Roman Empire, and I'm going to beat up on those Catholic forces a little bit, right? And not only did he show up and do this, but Gustavus Adolphus, jot this down really, really quickly, is considered the father of modern-day military because he showed up with new strategies, right? New strategies that he was like, oh, the Catholics want to fight this way? Well, we're going to fight this way, right? He actually reinforced his army with even more musketeers or guys that have guns, right? He used pikemen to actually stop the charges of like Catholic cavalry. He also used his lighter cavalry as a thing called shock troops that would actually run in, bat, 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 and then just like ride away. He also used lighter and more mobile artillery to be able to outflank and move around the Catholic forces, and also he creates new units that can independently move around each other. Another big thing that he introduces is this thing called volley firing, where basically everyone goes, ready, aim, fire, and they would actually let off individual shots all at once and then descend into just shooting at will. But the big thing about it, though, is Gustavus Adolphus shows up with a massive army, and all the Catholic forces led by Ferdinand II are like, what are we supposed to do with this guy? He's got so much money. And wait a minute, why does he have so much money? The thing about it is, the French were being supported by a French Catholic cardinal by the name of Cardinal Richelieu. And the king of France at the time was Louis XIII. But he was a very weak king, and he allowed Cardinal Richelieu, his chief minister, to rule a lot in his stead. But wait a second, Cardinal? This doesn't make any sense. He's Catholic. Why would he give a bunch of money and stuff to this Swedish king to fight against other Catholic forces? Aha! Good question right there, Inyasha. I love that question, right? Something that you're beginning to realize is the motivations of this war are beginning to change, right? The motivations of the war in the Bohemian and Danish phase were religious, right? It was Protestants versus Catholics about your faith and about Christianity. It's now turning into a political war, right? It went from being religious to transferring into a political war due to the fact of this concept called the balance of power, right? France wanted to grow their influence and grow the influence of the Swedes to try and reduce the ability for the Habsburg rulers to rule, right? And a lot of this has to do with the fact that France felt cornered, right? On one side of them was the Habsburg Germans, right? The Austrian Habsburgs. On this side of them, the Holy Roman Empire. And below them to the south were the Spanish Habsburgs coming at them from both sides. So the French wanted to fund the Swedish army to get them to deal a devastating blow to the Holy Roman Empire and their forces, right? And so this is now becoming a very politicized and very political-like war. Well, Gustavus Adolphus fights in this war and dramatically kind of like really pushes a lot of big things, wins a huge set of major battles, but unfortunately dies in the process and gets shot during the middle of one of these battles, and he ends up perishing. And following his death, they end up signing another set of peace agreements, and then about, yet again, a couple of months goes by, and the French phase starts. And Richelieu is just like, oh, heck nah, bro. Like, I'm just about to come at you right now. And he starts directly invading Habsburg lands and fighting massive sets of wars against the Germanic and Spanish Habsburgs, right? Now, in the long run, though, something that's very important that you need to understand. Was there a clear winner in this war, right? You could argue in a lot of ways that the second phase was dominated by the people going against the Holy Roman Empire. The first phase was dominated by the armies of the Holy Roman Empire, right? Well, the big thing about it, though, is this war doesn't really have a clear-cut winner. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it was just so obscenely violent, right? Obscenely violent, right? To give you perspective or an example, statistically speaking, that you might be able to drop in like a short answer question one day, World War I, which happened in 1914 to 1918, killed millions of people and literally killed apparently 1.7% of the world population at the time. That's bananas. 1.7% of people died in a war that was really chaotic because machine guns were first being used, tanks, poisonous gas, trench warfare, semi and fully automatic rifles, right? 1.4% or 4 to 6 million people during this war ended up dying without any automatic guns, using garbage muskets, stabbing each other to death, and using these terrifying pikes that they would actually kill each other with, right? So the thing about it was, this war was so violent, and going on during that little ice age, and during the era of inflation, and killing so many people, and townspeople, using guns that were so rudimentary like this one, that it literally just devastated people's ability to keep fighting. And what's going to end up happening is a series of treaties are going to be actually signed just to bring an end to the religious violence. And concessions would be made, Calvinism would be added to the Peace of Augsburg, and people are like, look, worship Jesus however you want. I can't kill people like this anymore. It was just so chaotic and intense that literally Cardinal Richelieu right here is being seen sieging the city of La Rochelle, which is one of the most intense things I've ever seen. La Rochelle, remember, is in France, so he was even attacking Protestants in France, but then also Catholics in the Holy Roman Empire. It was just a massive, crazy war that just led to the deaths of 6 million people. And another big thing that was going on as well was there were these roaming armies, right? Like, so a big thing you have to understand is war back then in the 1600s was not organized like it is the way now. It wasn't people being like, I am this army, you are that army, we will fight here at this time away from civilians. These armies were roaming around during the end of this little ice age, constantly looking for food. And so that they rolled up onto a Protestant village and they were like, we are a Protestant army. Are you a Protestant village? And they would be like, yes, we are a Protestant village. And they would be like, okay, we won't kill you. We're just going to take all of your food and supplies and leave the village there to starve to death. And then if the Protestant army rolled up, or if a Catholic army rolled up on the Protestant village and was like, we are a Catholic army. Are you a Catholic village? And they were like, no, we're a Protestant village. They would be like, okay, we're going to take all of your supplies and not leave you to starve to death, but we're going to mass execute people. One of the biggest and most defining traits of the 30 Years' War, mass executions, assault, roasting people alive in some of these towns and cities because these armies were desperately looking for supplies and food. This war devastated the ability for many Europeans at the time to even function in society and crush their ability to actually understand what is going on, what is going forward, and led, ironically enough, to more religious tolerance throughout the entirety of the continent itself. After this is the last big climactic war of religion, right? This is going to be the last straw because people just can't function or take it anymore, right? So this series of treaties, known as the Treaty of Westphalia, is going to be signed in 1648. Very big, very, very important, and now time period 1 is officially done when we're actually getting into like all this stuff in European history. But the Treaty of Westphalia is a series of treaties that concluded the 30 Years' War, which marked the end of that large-scale religious violence. The Peace of Augsburg is going to be re-ratified, and Calvinism is even going to be made legal throughout most other countries and stuff like that. Throughout even parts of like France, throughout southern France, throughout other areas as well, throughout the entirety of the Holy Roman Empire, you could practice anything you wanted, especially if it was in private, right? If you wanted to be a Lutheran, go practice at home and be a Lutheran even if your king is Catholic, right? So the big thing about it, though, is also the huge results of it, though, are going to just be dramatically repressive, right? 4 to 6 million people are going to die in this war. Disease is going to spread like crazy and kill so many different people in all these different villages. Extreme famine is going to be caused because of the Little Ice Age. European power shifts are going to occur as well, because now we can see a growing power of France, and the HRE is shrinking, right? Now, at the time, before the 30 Years' War, most of the power in Europe belonged to the Habsburg family, right? And so the big thing about that, though, is since most of the power belonged to the Habsburg family, France wanted to grow its power to equal the balance of power out. Now, a big thing about the balance of power is that you are going to need to understand that, and you're going to need to understand it going forward, because it's going to become a big concept, politically speaking, throughout the most of European history, or the rest of European history in general. So the other thing about it, though, getting into it, is the map is also going to be completely reworked. As you can tell, France's borders have now grown. The Holy Roman Empire is now just a shell of its former self. And you can see that we're having the growth of different powers. The Habsburg monarchy is going to begin to focus more on Austria and Hungary rather than on the position of Holy Roman Empire anymore. Also, the Spanish crown is going to be dealing with a lot of economical issues and inflation. So what's going to end up happening now, though, is a massive power vacuum has been created. Write that down. Power vacuum. P-O-W-E-R-V-A-C-U-U-M. All right, so yeah, a power vacuum is an idea in government and politics where now that so many nobles have died in this war and so many peasants have died in this war and even some kings and leaders like Gustavus Adolphus have died in this war, that the amount of ruling power that nobles and the church used to have has now just flittered away, right? And so now there's a space and that someone needs to take power. And so who is going to enter into that power vacuum? None other than the monarchs, right? This power vacuum helps give the ability for monarchs to build up their states and shift the power towards themselves. So what's going to happen during, before, and after the 30 Years' War, you're going to see the growth of 2 different types of governments. Absolutist governments and constitutional governments, right? Now, an absolutist government is where all power falls directly under personal control of a monarch, right? Where they believe that they have all of the power, no one else shares it, they have it, whatever they say goes, right? If they say off with their head, it's off with their head, right? But then you have constitutional governments, where the king or monarch has to respect laws that are passed by legislators, right? Legislators are like the Congress in the United States, the Senate, the House of Representatives, or the Parliament in Great Britain. Write down Parliament next to legislature as an example, right? And we'll talk more about the British Parliament in this unit and stuff like that. Now, going into it as well, absolutist governments are the big ones during this time period, are going to be places like France, Spain, Central Europe, Russia. Constitutional governments are going to be, your biggest example is going to be England and the Dutch Republic, right? But they both have the same goal, right? They both want to do the same thing. They want to grow, they want to develop infrastructure, they want to tax the living snot out of everybody, and they want to excel, right? They want to grow and become the most dominant power that they possibly can be, and they want it to be for France, not for France and Spain, but for them and for their country, right? So we're also seeing, though, obstacles to this. The kings are going to have to deal with some different stuff. Like language, for example. Not everybody in their country speaks the same language. Technology is going to be a big issue that they have to kind of conquer over. Like they don't even have roads and infrastructures, right? And they also have to figure out, how do I equip my army to make it bigger and better, so if I do end up going to war, I'm going to win, right? So we're going to cut it off right here because I told you I'd keep it short, and we'll talk more about how they're going to accomplish all this stuff a little bit tomorrow, but I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.